This story took place when I was a teenager, around the age of 10 or 11. My mother and I were driving to pick up my niece from an extracurricular activity. We were making pretty good time, so when an older woman approached us at a red light to ask for a lift, we agreed. Her destination was on the way to getting my niece, and since we had time to spare, we thought it would be fine. The woman didn't look great. Her clothes were disheveled, and something seemed off about her, but we understood that mental illness and homelessness often run hand in hand, and we wanted to help her. She was friendly though, and after explaining exactly where she needed to go, she started saying that she knew my mother from somewhere. When we got to her destination, she laughed and said she had gotten mixed up, and that she meant to have taken us somewhere else. This is when, I'm sure we know each other, started becoming the primary topic the lady wanted to discuss. My mother said she didn't recall the woman, and asked where we needed to take her. She gave the new directions, almost as if it were an unrelated matter, and started with, "Come on, you gotta recognize me." The new location wasn't a deal breaker, but it definitely ate up any time to spare we had in picking up my niece. As we drove, instead of making small talk like before, we just listened to the lady rattle off places and events unrelated to us as she tried to figure out how she knew my mother. As we drove, we kept asking if it looked like we were getting closer to where she actually needed to go, and she assured us we were on track. When pulled up to the new destination, the lady pulled up the same routine. She acted shocked, and then started laughing about how silly she was for giving the wrong street again. I've been so scatterbrained lately. Does that ever happen to you? It was obvious at this point that the woman had nowhere to go, and was just trying to stay with us. Maybe she thought that we could offer her food, or a place to stay. I don't know, but we couldn't help her in that way. We were going through a tough time financially, and after how weird and deceptive she had been, neither of us wanted her near my young niece. We just couldn't help. My mother said she would drop the woman a few blocks away, which was on the main drag of the city, and gave her $2 bus fare. The woman took the money, and said that would be fine, but of course when we got there she wouldn't get out. In fact, she wouldn't even acknowledge our request for her to leave. She just kept smiling and insisting my mother knew her. My mother gave me a look, and I got out the car and opened the back door for her. She didn't even seem to notice me. When my mother said, "I'm sorry, but I need to pick up my granddaughter, please get out of my car," the woman exploded. She started cursing, calling my mother a bitch, and then climbing over the seat, grabbing my mother's hair, and started punching her. I saw red. I grabbed the woman by the collar of her shirt and ripped her out of the car. The back of her heels hit the curb and she went down, flat on her back. I remember seeing her hit the ground, her hood flung over her face, and her shirt hiked up over her gigantic belly. She wasn't moving, and I was afraid I'd really hurt her. A few teenagers saw the whole thing, and I started to explain myself, how I was protecting my mother. They said they could see what happened, and were asking if we were okay, when the woman came to. She didn't give a shit about me, and went flying back in the car after my mom. I managed to catch her by the back of the shirt, but not before she snatched my mother's gym bag from the back seat. I slammed the door, and told my mother to drive away, then ran after the car to hop in. The woman chased after, throwing stuff from the bag at the car. Then we saw the blue lights. 2 cops had seen it from their car and were obviously coming to get involved. As soon as she saw the lights, the woman turned 180 and started making off with the bag. 1 cop went after her, and the other came to talk to us. My mom was pretty amped and told the cop she didn't care about the bag or pressing charges. She just had to get her granddaughter. So they let us leave, only taking names and phone numbers. We weren't more than 10 minutes late from picking up my niece. My mom still doesn't remember ever meeting that woman before that night. This story took place when I was in my young teenage years. Normally I don't take ride offers from strangers, but on this particular day, I was in need of a ride home. It all started after I finished my classes and was about to head home on the 20-minute walk. The weather had predicted a large thunderstorm outside, with heavy rain. Of course I wasn't prepared. I didn't bring an umbrella because I was a stupid teenager at the time. When I left the school, I realized I made a massive mistake. The storm was very bad outside, making it impossible to get home without getting soaked. My plan was to go under the bus stop and stick out my thumb in hopes that a kind person would stop and offer me a ride home. I would have opted to taking the bus home, but I didn't have any money on me. This story also took place a long time ago, when most people didn't have iPhones, or any phones in general, so I couldn't call my parents. I figured it would take a while until someone stopped, so I sat down and just waited. I kid you not, just 2 minutes of waiting later, a vehicle with tinted windows began to slow down, coming to a complete stop in front of the bus stop. I figured he was going to offer me a ride, so I sat up and walked towards his car. The window on the passenger side of the car slowly started rolling down. An older man with grayish hair and sunglasses looked at me. "John, is that you?" he asked. I just looked at him all confused. "Never mind, sorry, I was supposed to pick somebody up from school," he told me. I replied with, "Oh, alright," and began to sit back down on the bus stop seat. Did you need a ride home? The weather is horrible outside," he asked. I figured he was probably waiting on that John person, so I politely declined. "I have a couple of minutes to spare. I can give you a ride." This time I figured he was just being nice, so I decided to accept the ride. He gestured with his hand for me to get in the passenger seat in the front. Since I wanted to get home, I obeyed and hopped in the front. By this time, the weather outside was getting even worse, making it almost impossible to see in front of you. "So, where do you live, kid?" The way he asked me this question was eerie. His voice sounded more creepy than before. I eventually gave him my address, to which he put it in his GPS. The GPS said 7 minutes, and that reassured me a little, as I was beginning to become a little paranoid and scared. As the man was driving, I tried looking towards him. It was dead silent in the car. The only thing you could hear were the raindrops on the car. The man eventually took off his sunglasses, revealing the rest of his face. He was missing an eye. I was startled for a second, which the man actually noticed. "Are you okay, kid?" "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied. "Do you want to know the story of what happened to my eye?" he asked in an eerie tone. Sure, I guess." I began to feel extremely uncomfortable. I looked at the GPS, realizing there was only 4 minutes left till we reached my house. The man began telling me his story. Apparently, he had an altercation with someone, as a fight broke out, which resulted in his eye getting badly injured. Eventually, he was taken to the hospital, in which they told him he was never going to see again. I kind of forgot how the full story went, as I was just focused on the road, not really listening to him. Just as he finished his story, he continued to drive straight, when the GPS was saying to turn right. Sir, you missed a turn, you need to go back," I asked in fear. "You know, I really like you, kid." This officially pushed everything over the edge. I began shaking in fear. "I'm not taking you home. How would you like to come with me and meet some of my friends?" he asked. "Can you please just let me get out?" He didn't respond, so I just sat there in shock. My heart was racing as I was trying to figure out what to do. I knew this would be insane, but I had to try to get out of the car somehow. As the car began to slow down for a turn, I quickly opened the car door and jumped out of the moving vehicle. I landed hard on the ground, rolling into the grass nearby. My head hit the ground and I was a little dizzy, but I fought my way up and started running towards my house. The car instantly stopped, and the man got out, yelling at me to get back inside. Apparently, one of the house owners on the block saw the situation and contacted the police. The man eventually got caught and was put in jail for attempted kidnapping. I was taken to the hospital after I reached my house, and I got away without any serious injuries. The scary part is that later that night, the police contacted my family and told them something terrifying. The man had apparently kidnapped other kids around my age and kept them trapped in their basement, to which he referred to them as friends. There are some questions that remain unanswered to this day. What would happen if he would have taken me to see his friends? What would have happened to John if I didn't accept that ride? And who was John? And what did the man want to do with him? This story took place a couple days ago. Ever since this experience, I have decided to never offer a ride to another person on the side of the road ever again. It all started on a random Tuesday. I had just clocked out of work a couple hours early and was headed on the way home. I was excited as I was planning on watching a new movie I had just recorded the previous night. By the way, I am 40 years old and I am married and have a family. although I never saw this coming. As I was driving home, it was around 8 p.m., so it was fairly dark outside. I was driving down some open country roads in the middle of nowhere, when suddenly my headlights illuminated a person standing on the side of the road. The man was sticking out his thumb, indicating he needed a ride. I slowed down a little, and my mind began racing. Should I pick up the guy and give him a ride, or should I go home and watch my movie? I don't know what it was, but something made me stop and offer him a ride. Maybe because he looked to be around my age. I rolled down my window and asked him what he was doing in the middle of nowhere. He basically explained how his car broke down at work and he was forced to walk home. But as the sun started to set, he decided to try and get a ride from someone. I asked him where he was headed. Up by Livingston, he replied. Livingston was the next door town to the one I live in, so I figured giving this guy a ride would not take long. I then unlocked my car and allowed the man inside. Instantly, the guy was extremely polite, asking how my day was and asking my name. We had a whole conversation for about 10 minutes. I found out his name was James, and he also had a family and 2 children. I realized picking up James was a great idea, up until the worst happened. As we continued driving down the dark road, James pulled out a gun from his back pocket and pointed it straight at my head. "Now, you're gonna do as I say whenever I say, got it?" he screamed. I was completely shook. This guy I was having a good conversation with all of a sudden was trying to kill me. It was hard to comprehend, as I was beginning to panic and fear for my life. James then told me to make a right, onto some old dirt road in the middle of nowhere. This is where I truly began to get scared. I knew there was no way to get to Livingston going down this road, but I couldn't try anything, or else I would risk getting killed. So I continued down this road. Eventually, after another 10 minutes, we pulled up to this old abandoned building in the middle of the woods. I really mean nowhere. There was no sign of anyone out here. James ordered me to stop the car at the entrance of the abandoned building. I had my eyes fixated on the door of the building, when 2 other guys dressed in all black started walking out. They were headed straight towards my car, and they each had knives in their hand. I knew I was in grave danger, so I began pleading with James. "Please, just let me go. I'll give you anything, please." This didn't seem to work, as he ordered me to step out the car while the gun was still pointed directly at me. My body was shaking, and voice was trembling as I stepped out. I was now surrounded by the 3 guys. "Empty all your pockets, give me everything, wallet, keys, phone, whatever." Hesitantly, I began emptying all my pockets, giving the 3 guys all my cards, cash, my phone, and my car keys. "Get the hell out of here and never return," he screamed. Without saying a word, I began walking down the dark dirt road at night. "Do you understand? You better not tell anyone about this or we'll find you," they threatened me. Traumatized without a flashlight, I began trying to find my way back towards the main road. By this time, it must have been around 10 p.m. Somehow I ended up finding my way back on the main road, where coincidentally, I ran into a cop sitting on the side of the road. I told him the entire story. The cop ended up calling an ambulance for me. He then called for backup and drove down the dark dirt road towards the abandoned building. I was driven home by the ambulance and met with my wife and kids. I was so happy to have survived. A couple hours later, we hear a knock at the front door. At this point, it must have been 1 a.m., but as I looked out the window, I realized it was the police. I unlocked the door, only to see the same police officer that saved me earlier. He gave me my cash, cards, my phone, and my keys. The cop then explained what happened. When he arrived, he found the 3 guys getting in my car. Since he called for backup, they were able to surround my car and arrest the 3 guys. The cop then had my car towed to the police station. He said I would be able to pick it up in the morning. So in the end, everything worked out fine. But it scares me to think about how lucky I was to not have been killed by those 3 guys.